Sara didn't wake up one day suddenly fearless. She woke up tired of doubting herself. At the office, she watched her hands type a status update with perfect calm. Then she watched those same hands tremble when her husband called, twice in a row. She let it ring. The silence felt like stepping onto thin ice, but it held. Later, a colleague named Maya asked, "Want to grab a coffee?" Her voice was casual, but her eyes were kind, like she had noticed the way Sara sometimes flinched when her phone buzzed. In a small café near the S-Bahn, the windows fogged with warmth, Sara wrapped her hands around a mug and tried to speak. The first words came out like a confession. "I think something is wrong at home." Maya didn't rush in with advice. She didn't demand details. She only said, "Tell me what it feels like." And that question, simple, patient, made Sara's throat tighten. Because for so long, Sara had been trained to describe everything except her own experience. Now she whispered the truth. "It feels like I'm not allowed to be a person." Sara spoke slowly, as if her words needed permission. "He tells me I'm too sensitive," she said. "If I'm upset, it's drama. If I'm quiet, it's attitude. If I decide something for our daughter, he says I'm disrespectful." Maya nodded once, grounded. "That sounds like control," she said gently. Sara's eyes stung. "I keep thinking maybe I'm the problem," she admitted. "Because he's so sure. He talks like he's the adult and I'm a mistake." Maya didn't argue. She reflected. When someone is always sure and you're always confused, that's often part of the pattern. Sara exhaled like she had been holding her breath for 8 years. "I don't want my daughter to learn this," Sara whispered. Maya's expression softened. "Then it matters that you're seeing it now." Sara looked out at the rainy Hamburg street, people moving with umbrellas, each person allowed to take up space. In Sara's mind, another old sentence surfaced: "No one will believe you." But here was Maya, believing her without requiring proof. Sara's voice shook. "What if I can't handle it alone?" Maya said. "You shouldn't have to." Maya didn't give Sara a script. She gave her something safer: options. "There are counselors," she said, "and women's support services, people trained to listen without judgment. Even if you're not ready for big decisions, you can talk. You can get support." Sara swallowed. Support sounded like something other people deserved. She had grown used to coping quietly, like it was a virtue. Maya continued, "And you can choose one safe step at a time." Sara nodded, relief mixing with fear. She wasn't asking for a rescue. She was asking for steadiness. On the way back, Sara walked slower than usual. She noticed small things: the smell of bread from a bakery, the rhythm of her boots on wet pavement, the way her body felt when no one was watching her choices. At home, her husband's mood filled the air like weather. "Where were you?" he asked. Sara kept her voice neutral. "Coffee after work?" He narrowed his eyes. "With who?" Sara felt the old panic rise. Then she remembered Maya's question. "What does it feel like?" "It feels like interrogation." Sara didn't say that out loud. She just said calmly, "A colleague." She didn't over-explain. and the lack of explanation felt like a small reclaiming. That night, Sara read her daughter a bedtime story about a lighthouse. The lighthouse didn't chase ships, it didn't argue with storms. It simply stood steady so lost travelers could find direction. When her daughter fell asleep, Sara sat at the kitchen table and opened her notes again. But this time she added a new section. What I know is true. I know I feel anxious at home. I know I feel safe at work. I know respect shouldn't require silence. I know my daughter notices everything. Sara's hand paused. A new truth arrived, quiet and undeniable. I'm allowed to want peace. In the living room, her husband laughed loudly at something on his phone. Sara flinched, then softened her shoulders. She didn't need to police her own body. She could notice. She could breathe. She could return to herself. The basil plant on the windowsill looked brighter again. Sara watered it carefully. A thought rose. Witnessing is water. Maybe that's what Maya had given her. Not answers, water. And Sara could feel herself slowly coming back to life. A few days later, Sara met Maya again, this time during a quick lunch. Sara said, I keep thinking, if I just explain better, he'll finally understand. Maya looked at her kindly. Does he misunderstand, or does he refuse? The question hit Sara like cold air. Sara remembered how she handled conflict at work. If a teammate disagreed, they listened, adjusted, collaborated. At home, disagreement became punishment. Sara whispered, He refuses. Maya nodded. Then your job isn't to convince. Your job is to protect your reality. Protect your reality. Sara repeated the phrase in her head as she walked back to the office. That evening, her husband criticized her again, this time the way she spoke to their daughter. You're spoiling her, he said. Do it my way. Sara felt heat rise in her chest. Then she pictured her daughter's face when she asked, Why do you always say sorry? Sara said evenly, I'm choosing a gentle approach. He scoffed. You think you know better? Sara didn't debate the bait. She simply said, I'm choosing a gentle approach. It wasn't a victory, but it was a boundary, and it felt like standing in her own life again. One weekend morning, Sara took her daughter grocery shopping. It was ordinary, and that was the point. In the fruit aisle, her daughter reached for apples. Can we get the red ones? She asked. Sara smiled. Yes. Such a small decision, and yet Sara felt her body relax because no one was correcting her. At the checkout, Sara noticed a mother laughing with her child, no fear in her eyes, no calculating. Sara felt grief, sharp and clean, not because her relationship was ending in her mind, because she realized how much of her life had been spent surviving instead of living. Back home, her husband looked at the grocery bags and said, Why did you buy that brand? I told you the other one. Sara felt the old urge to apologize. She looked at her daughter, who was opening a bag of apples like it was treasure. Sara said softly, This is what I chose. He rolled his eyes. Unbelievable. Sara didn't explain. She didn't plead for understanding. She carried the apples to the table. Inside her chest, she felt something steady, a new rule, her own. I won't abandon myself to keep him comfortable. That night, Sara lay awake, listening to the city. Hamburg had its own heartbeat, trains in the distance, rain at the window, a neighbor's muffled footsteps. Sara thought about the difference between her fear and her intuition. Fear said, "You can't do this." Intuition said, "This isn't love." She thought of Spain, family far away, well-meaning voices that might say, "Come back." But Sara didn't want to be pulled by fear in any direction. She wanted to move by truth. She opened her notebook and wrote one sentence that felt like a bridge. "I don't need him to agree with my reality for it to be real." Her eyes filled again, not with confusion but with relief. Because if she stopped debating reality, she could finally use her energy for herself, for her daughter, for the life she wanted to build. Sara placed the notebook in a drawer, not to hide it but to keep it safe. Then she turned off the light. In the dark, she whispered the simplest prayer she knew. "Let me trust me." The next morning, Sara didn't feel suddenly free, but she felt unenchanted. The spell had been, "Maybe it's me." Now the truth was, this is a pattern. At breakfast, her husband corrected her again. Sara watched the familiar shape of it, how he spoke like an authority, how he treated her choices like errors. She looked at her daughter, swinging her legs at the chair, humming. Sara's heart softened and hardened at the same time, softened with love, hardened with clarity. Later, on the way to the kita, Sara held her daughter's hand and felt her own feet on the ground. She didn't have to solve everything today. She didn't have to win an argument. She only had to keep choosing truth. And truth sounded like this: "My feelings are data. My needs are real. My voice matters." Sara kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered, "We're going to be okay." It wasn't a promise of ease. It was a promise of direction. And that was enough, because clarity is power. And Sara was finally holding it.